Good day and greetings from Pretoria, South Africa. My name is Dr. Charles Cotter. I'm the Learning Navigator, the Change Management and Leadership in a Crisis online learning program, part of the e-learning series. This is an on-demand learning program and comprises of 6 modules. Each of the registered learners will receive a SlideShare presentation per module, and then also a detailed workbook which comprises the content, but also a series of learning activities, which I'll expect you to complete at the end of each of these modules. I think this is probably the best way of continuing the engagement and also to stimulate discussion between the Learning Navigator and the registered learners. As a form of introduction, I'd like to give you a quick overview of my professional pedigree. Essentially, I've been in the field of education, training, development for the last 19 years. Of those 19, 15 as an independent contractor. I've been very privileged to have worked for over 140 different companies, both in the public and private sector. And of course, this stretches across 18 different countries and 4 different continents. My area of subject matter expertise is strategic management, change management, and also strategic human resources management. So let's look at some of the expert or thought leadership strategies. And again, I'd like to cement this activity by looking at learning activity 13, which again, I will ask you to review all of these expert strategies. You'll also find extensive literature in workbook 5. So I'm not necessarily going to go through all of these strategies in the greatest of detail, but I have given you the literature that you're welcome to work through in your own time. And I'd like to hear your insights as to, of these strategies, which ones do you think are the most viable, the most feasible, and the most sustainable to implement, the most relevant in your organization, especially during a time of crisis, and also especially if you're confronted with the management of the remote working force. So the first expert set of strategies that I'd like us to look at is that of the Chartered Institute of Personnel Development. They are the professional custodians of human resources management, personnel development in the UK, and they suggest that there are 4 strategies. The first one is employee voice, and I'd like to touch on this a little bit later, but these are essentially the platforms, the opportunities where management can engage in dialogue, constructive and two-way dialogue with employees. And of course, this means that with remote working culture, we might have to harness technology as a means of staying in contact through video conferencing. Zoom meetings, I think, have become very popular. Google also have moved into that market to challenge the dominance of Zoom. So there's many different technological platforms that change leaders could harness to make sure that we create the level of employee engagement and ultimately this employee voice. And I think it's also in the spirit of workplace democracy, which then enables people to feel that they're part of the key decisions that are taken at organizational level. And this, of course, might lead to heightened levels of innovation and creativity as well. I think you would have picked up throughout this particular learning program the one common denominator, the consistent variable throughout the process has been effective communication, different forms of communication, not just verbal communication, but also the ability of change leaders to be effective listeners, to be empathic listeners. So we did also say previously that communication is sometimes regarded as the lifeblood of any employment relationship. And of course, when communication is stifled, it creates serious employment and people management issues. Also, role modeling seems to be a very consistent variable. Now, we said this previously, that employees need to feel that their leaders are exemplary. They can put them on a pedestal, they can look up to them, and they are leaders of credibility, leaders of ethical and substance, and of course, also leaders of integrity. Also, fair and just employment and management practices are very important, especially when dealing with organizational grievances and problems. And also, we're going to talk about employee well-being. In fact, it's going to be an extension to Module 6, where we're going to spend quite a bit of time looking at the importance of employee well-being, employee assistance strategies, which tend to be very effective, especially when dealing with crisis management, especially dealing with the remote working culture. The second set of strategies that I'd like us to review is proposed by Gallup, And like I've repeatedly stated, they are the global research thought leaders. And of course, they give us 3 strategies. And like I said, employee wellness, which is the 3rd strategy, we can actually park that for module 6 and unpack that in greater detail with our next module. So the 2 that I'd like us to focus on with module 5, selecting the right people and the right managers. And again, we said this with our definition and the introduction to this video clip, that the talent acquisition is a very important component at the front end, the upstream component to the HR value chain, making sure that we not only appoint but also promote the right people. And we're going to look at the strategies on how to achieve this. Also, Gallup are world renowned and famous for adopting a strengths-based leadership coaching approach. And I think this is very important, especially during a time of crisis, that we don't fixate on just identifying performance or developmental gaps, but rather we try to accentuate and amplify employee strengths. You did appoint them, there was something, an X factor, a bit of magic that you identified at the front end of the talent acquisition process. So I think we need to go back to that and see how we can capitalize on that as much as possible. And like I've mentioned, we're going to park this for module 6. The 3rd strategy that Gallup do suggest, the enhancement, the optimization of employee well-being. And again, you'll also get the literature in workbook 6. So let's look at the selection of the right people and the right managers. It's very clear that there's a link between the appropriate employment practices, talent acquisition, and how this is a driver of employee engagement. So what we need to do is we need to be talent spotters. You'll see later on I talk about talent liberators, and we need to be able to support, position, sometimes even reposition, empower, and engage the top talent in the organization. Complementing this, of course, we have our HR planning, our succession planning strategies, the succession planning 9-box matrix, which is very important. And of course, we can also identify by looking at the top talent in the organization and making sure that we have locked down and talent management strategies to retain the most talented people, the cream of the crop in the organization. Also, we said this with change leadership. Change leaders typically, they energize, they don't polarize. And of course, the positive influence that they exert really is able to extract the best and the most from the most talented people. What I really like about the work of Gallup is that they provided us not only with research intelligence, and they've also provided us with a toolkit. And one of the most important tools with this particular aspect, psychometric tool, is what they call the Engagement Creation Index, the ECI, which then can be used to measure the capacity of managers in their ability to effectively engage people. And of course, this means that there's no longer excuse for bad managerial promotions. We often fixate, and organizations are guilty of this, focusing on qualifications, focusing on managerial experience, focusing even on technical skills, and not necessarily measuring and giving sufficient weight to the recruitment decision, the promotional decision, to the importance of, in this case, the Engagement Creation Index. I really think it's a tool that organizations should be harnessing a lot more effectively. And of course, if we can identify managers who have this natural ability, this talent, this would mean that they become, like we said with the previous module, change catalyst leaders. And of course, they can create a very powerful, engaged work team, either on site, but also a remote working team. Further to this, we've mentioned the link here to talent acquisition, and also not just at an individual level, but also the benefits at a team level. We said improved levels of team cohesion. Also, we should seek out opportunities to maximize employee engagement in the workplace. We said employee voice and creating those platforms for engagement. People need to feel that they're part of something special. And of course, if they feel that sense of belonging, they feel supported, and they can see through what we often talk about, the job characteristics model. We can talk about task significance. We can see that people feel that what they're doing is important and is making a meaningful contribution to the achievement of team and ultimately organizational goals. Also, we can see that managers who are better equipped with these engagement skills, they tend to be pivotal, and they are ultimately the drivers of enhanced levels of employee engagement. The second strategy that Gallup have recommended is to harness employee strengths. And of course, strengths-based leadership coaching is very important. And as the slide says there, we need to help employees align their talent. And we said this right at the front end of this learning program, that we need to recommend the introspection, we need to do the diagnosis, we need to do the reflection, and of course encourage the team members to do a SWOT analysis where they can identify their strengths, and then we can assist them through the strengths-based leadership coaching approach to direct them towards tasks or projects or work assignments where they can capitalize and they can benefit on these talents to their best of their abilities. So we've got to engage in these performance conversations. We've got to sit down and actively help employees set goals, career goals, professional development goals, learning goals. This is all part of the role and contribution of change leaders, and also helping them create these win-win, mutually beneficial working arrangements. Employees shouldn't feel exploited. They shouldn't feel that the company's taking advantage of them. They must feel that the company's invested not only in their development, but also invested in their future. So organizations and change leaders in particular who represent those organizations, we need to have this growth mindset. We need to have this investment mindset, this abundance mindset. I call it talent liberation. And we need to make sure that through these platforms and these structures, these processes, the systems, that we create these opportunities where we can capitalize on this as an organizational asset. Gallup also suggests 4 additional strategies which can be integrated into a collective employee engagement strategy. And again, in the workbook, you'll find additional literature. And also, I'm going to give you, as part of the Digital Learning Resources Hub, I'm going to give you access to the extensive reports, Tiny Pulse, who I'll be quoting later on in this video clip, the Gallup, and also the work of Deloitte, which is very pivotal in our understanding and our insights, the research intelligence that I mentioned earlier on. So Gallup also suggests strategy and leadership philosophy, and this is the heartbeat of this particular program. That's, of course, change leadership and the strategic mindset that's so important, accountability and performance. And I think we looked in module 1 at the ProSci research intelligence as to why change management fails. And we often find that it's got to do with the accountability. We don't always hold our change leadership teams accountable for the implementation. We've already established that the track record of success is as low as 30%. So I think performance and accountability must be embedded into this measurement culture and also the organizational culture. Very important that we achieve that. Also communication, again, you'll see this seems to be a consistent repetition throughout the process. Knowledge management, I think you'll agree with me, the most progressive organizations, they often call themselves intelligent enterprises or smart companies. And the common denominator is all of these companies have a knowledge management system where they capture both their successes but also their failures, and they feed back into the communication loop so that future change managers and leaders don't repeat the mistakes of their predecessors. That's very important. And another golden thread that you'll see, which is consistently mentioned by all of these expert theorists, is, of course, growth, learning, innovation, and of course, development. And like we said, development is a very important driver of engagement, but ultimately skills development, which is useful then for driving business performance. So development, ongoing learning, we spoke about the high-low in the previous modules, the high-impact learning organizational culture. Change leaders need to create the spirit of learning, and of course the transfer of learning, which is so important. When we look at the 70-20-10% model of learning, it's very clear that the majority of learning actually takes place through on-the-job experiential learning and not necessarily through formal classroom-based type of learning. Further to this, and again, you'll find the detail in Workbook 5 as you navigate through this. So I'm just going to run through the alternative strategies that Gallup do suggest. Also, the pulse checks, very important, at least on a quarterly basis, that we need to measure the current level of employee engagement, previously called climate studies or climate surveys. We need to look at this at a local level. If you're a multinational company, we need to escalate it to different enterprise levels. We said it previously, selection of the right managers, coaching, the strengths-based leadership coaching culture, which is very important. And then, of course, the accountability, holding them accountable for improvements and making sure that if they don't succeed, that, of course, they are penalized. And I think this is very important that we do this. Also, the engagement goals need to be realistic. I think Management Theory 101 will always teach us about SMART goals. The goals that we set need to be specific, they need to be measurable, they need to be achievable, they need to be realistic, and they also need to be time-bound. And I think we need to seek out these additional ways of trying to connect and maybe even reconnect with the employees remotely, virtually, but also finding ways, if there is opportunity for face-to-face, in-person engagement, that we do this as efficiently and as effectively as possible. The next set of strategies that I'd like to look at is Michael Armstrong. He often is regarded as a subject matter expert, strategic human resources management, and of course he does suggest that there are 5 strategies, which very strongly correlates with what Gallup is saying, with what the other experts are saying, CIPD in particular, leadership again, right at the top of the list, the working environment. I think you'll agree with me, on-site, off-site, the remote working culture, the working environment is very important. The working environment must be conducive. People must feel that they are part of something that is going to result in meaningful progress, and of course not just changing for the sake of changing. Job design, very important. So again, we need to make sure that we match people to the environment, the person-environment fit, also matching people to the job. And I've said it previously with this module, it's not just about the mechanics of doing the work. There's also the dynamics, the softer side, the people side of performing jobs, but also the analytics, making sure that we have proper key performance indicators, not just from a performance management perspective, but also from an employee engagement perspective. So the ECI that we mentioned, I think, is a very good tool to measure that, but also incorporating these employee engagement goals into middle and senior and executive managers' individual performance scorecards, and like we've established, holding them accountable for the achievement of those goals. Performance management, very important. We often talk about the performance equation, which is the measure of motivation in a team, which is a measure of the skills or the capability, but also the environment. And I think collectively, those 3 would constitute heightened levels of performance, and really has changed leadership teams, especially during a time of crisis. This is really something we need to concentrate on, improving the motivational levels, improving the working environment, the conditions, the working conditions, and also making sure that people are adequately equipped and skilled and competent to perform their managerial and also operational duties. Not far behind Gallup in terms of the research intelligence output and global research thought leadership is an American company called Tiny Pulse. And again, in this digital learning resources hub that I'll be sharing with you post this on-demand learning program, I will then be sharing this particular report, the 2018 report, and they suggest that there are 5 strategies. Again, a very strong overlap with what the other experts are saying. We said it, managers, very pivotal to the process. In fact, they are the energy and the fuel to creating this heightened sense of loyalty and this commitment, ultimately engagement, and ultimately enhancing the EX, the employee experience. Recognition. We're going to talk about this with Module 6, and it's very clear that the global studies are unanimous that employee recognition is the #1 driver of employee motivation. Studies done by Glassdoor in particular, I'll be sharing that with you in Module 6, and we can see that this form of recognition, it doesn't have to always be financial recognition. I think sometimes we underestimate the power of praise and also just complimenting people, saying thank you for a job well done. Also the work-life balance, and I think this has become very topical right now. So the more people work from home, the more challenged they are with trying to balance their domestic and personal responsibilities with their work responsibilities. And we have a sense of duty as organizational change leaders to make sure that they have the resources and we equip them with coping mechanisms on how to master the sometimes tightrope that they need to walk in striking a balance between life and work. Quality of work life has always been a very important HR and employment metric. Also the culture, I've quoted Peter Drucker quite extensively throughout this particular online learning program, and we've said it, culture and compensation, always eat strategy for breakfast. So if you think strategy is important, you'd be right, but it's not as important as culture. So culture tends to dominate, and culture tends to be the #1 driver of employee engagement. And like we said repeatedly, the growth opportunities, this serves almost as a talent magnet. So at the upstream of the HR value chain, we need to develop what we call employee value proposition. Midstream, we need to develop what we call the total reward statement. So that is just in the toolkit that we will use to make sure that we can attract, we can retain, we can motivate, and ultimately develop top talent. We can lock them in, and of course we can make sure that the levels of engagement stay consistently high throughout the change management process. So the final set of strategies that I'd like us to look at is a study done by probably the #1 academic journal in the world, the Harvard Business Review, and they suggest that recognition given for high performance rated at 72% is the #1 driver of employee engagement. And I think you'll agree with me that it ties up very nicely with what Tiny Pulse is saying. They listed recognition as a matter of priority, and this has been verified by the Harvard Business Review because they suggest that right at the top of the list is recognition. The contribution, the individual contribution. So again, the task significance is very important. We spoke about that. Senior leadership, and of course, how they harness their communication strategy is, these are the top 3 strategies, all at 70% and above. And of course, the communication of business goals, individual alignment of the scorecard, the personal goals with the professional goals. I think that's very important. So I'm going to leave this with you and you can work through it, but I think it validates what we said previously about some of the important goals. So at this point, we've concluded outcome 2 of module 5, and just as a quick review, we looked at the foremost expert theories with regards to employee engagement. We looked at the CIPD strategies. We've extensively unpacked the global research thought leader Gallup. We looked at their theories. We looked at Michael Armstrong, who from a strategic HRM perspective is widely regarded as an expert. Also, we looked at the American perspective, Tiny Pulse. And then we concluded that session by looking at the Harvard Business Review, who pinpointed employee recognition for top performance as the #1 strategy. So what I would like you to do is to cement this particular learning by the completion of learning activity 13. So at this point, you've completed learning activity 12, which is then the diagnostic survey by SurveyMonkey, where I'd like you to measure the levels of employee engagement. I'd like us to take it to the next level, and that is to critically review each of these expert theories. And I'd like you to identify those strategies, in particular during a time of crisis, in particular where you're working with contemporary change management issues like this work from home work culture, this remote work culture. You'll see with module 6, we're going to look at measuring the effectiveness of virtual teams and looking at some of the best practice principles in that regard. At this point, I want us to look at the viability, the feasibility, and also the sustainability of these expert theories. And you'll see the next slide, I want to recommend a very short YouTube video clip, which I think for me is probably on point when it comes to identifying the most appropriate strategies. But before you watch the video clip, I'd like you to complete learning activity 13. And then what you can do just for fun is you can reconcile your strategies. So just to quantify this, if you could identify reviewing CIPD, reviewing Gallup, reviewing Michael Armstrong, Tiny Polls, also the Harvard Business Review, pick your 9 top strategies that you think are the most effective in your organization. Write it up in a 2 to 3 page essay, email that to me. And like I said, what you can then do is to reconcile your top 9 strategies with the YouTube video clip. Very short 3 to 4 minute video clip. You'll find it very informative. You'll find it very insightful. And I think for me, it's a great way of solidifying what all the expert theories are suggesting. I'd like you to jot down from the video clip what are the 3 primary strategies. And in each of these 3 primary strategies, they drill down and identify 3 sub-strategies. So collectively a total of 9 strategies, and it'll be very useful if you can then compare that to the 9 strategies that you would have generated from a company specific perspective.
This is Charles Cotter signing out. I'd like to thank you for watching the video clip, Change Management and Leadership in a Crisis online learning program. Please be on the lookout for subsequent uploads on my YouTube learning channel of the other modules. Also, please have a look at the chat box section. You'll see in the comment section. If you'd like to access a copy of the workbook in PDF format, I'll gladly email that to you for this specific module, but also the other modules of the various video clips. I'd also like to remind you to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Please press the notification bell to be alerted of the subsequent uploads of the other modules, and also like to encourage you to reach out and contact me. My contact details and social media presence will be provided on the screen very shortly, so I'd encourage you to reach out. And of course, I would welcome any sort of communication or feedback regarding this video clip or any other learning content on my YouTube learning channel. Thank you. I appreciate your ongoing interest and active social media support. Thank you. You keep well. Bye-bye.